Every NBA offseason, it's always a team's hope to improve their roster or at least set them up for success depending on their direction, whether you're aiming to rebuild or contend now. And every offseason, you have a host of free agents, whether restricted or unrestricted, that teams are eyeing to sign with their available cap space. And of course, every offseason, there are always those head-scratching signings that make you think this front office is out of their minds. Or you also have the bargain deals where you tip your cap to management for landing such a sweet deal for said player. But whatever spectrum of good or bad signing you landed on, when the contracts were first signed, it's all based on the history of a player's productivity relative to their contract value and age at that point in time. We don't know how each newly signed player is going to outperform or underperform relative to their contract. And while for some of these 2023 offseason signings it's still relatively early to say definitively whether the team that signed them is regretting it, it doesn't stop us as fans in analyzing and discussing some of the regrettable contracts of the offseason now that we're nearly at the end of the year, the first year in the newly signed player's contract. So in this video, we're going to be going over contracts that were signed in the 2023 offseason that teams are already regretting. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subscribe to help the channel grow. We are nearing 50,000 subscribers, so I greatly appreciate that. And in return, I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, a few call outs when talking about these contracts. These are only contracts or contract extensions that were signed this past offseason in 2023. So players who signed with a new team or re-upped with their current team. It does not include sign-in trades or players that were signed from previous offseasons. Like, you're not going to see Ben Simmons' contract on this list because that contract was signed a few seasons back. And of course, when factoring in how regrettable a contract is, I'm also basing it on the value and length of the deal while also factoring in the player's age and the team's timeline. So by including a player on this list, it doesn't mean that I think they're trash as a player. They very well still could be a great player, but they're either not worth the contract they signed, or a team has since pivoted in their overall direction to where the contract on their books no longer makes sense. And I'm going to start with one that initially, when this guy was signed, I thought it was a fair deal because I've always maintained he's an underrated big. But now after the season has transpired and him having a down year and the team's overall direction, there is no question that this team is now regretting the signing, and that's the Toronto Raptors signing Jakob to a 4-year, $78 million deal. I mean, near $20 million a year for a guy like Poeltl is a lot to begin with, but he was one of the better rim protectors in the game. He had been improving his overall offense, one of the top offensive rebounders in the league, and the Raptors had also just traded for him at the prior deadline. So to let him walk for nothing after giving up assets to get him would not have made sense. And when they gave Poeltl that deal, the thought at that time was, well, we're still going to try to make this work. We're still going to try to compete now. Yeah, we lost Van Fleet, but we still have our star in Pascal Siakam. We still got one of the better two-way players in the league in OG Anunoby, and their young star in Scotty Barnes. They needed a center, and Poeltl was that guy. And then, of course, the season didn't turn out the way they thought it would. They realized this group already hit its ceiling, and so they traded Siakam, OG, and they signaled the rebuild. And now you got Poeltl on a pretty sizable deal for a player who, yes, is still young, only 28, but doesn't fit their timeline, and has kind of regressed a bit from last season. And now you're going to be paying this guy for the next 3 seasons until he's 31, when the focus for the Raptors now should all be about cap flexibility and future assets to build with for a few years out from now. So yes, I would venture to say that the Raptors regret this signing. Next on the list, a couple of smaller deals relative to some of the other ones I'm going to be talking about, but the first one is Grant Williams, who signed a 4-year, $53.3 million contract with the Dallas Mavericks after Boston opted to not keep him around. And the reason for the regret was not so much the contract value, although I'd argue it is a bit high for someone like Grant Williams, but more so the guys didn't vibe well with Williams. They said he rubbed them the wrong way from the beginning. And case in point of it being a regret, dude instantly gets traded in the first year of his contract at the deadline to the Charlotte Hornets. Like, this was supposed to be a big signing for the Mavericks to bolster their front court depth, and they said, nope, this isn't going to work. This was a mistake, and they quickly moved him. So I guess this one is obvious, even though he's not with the team anymore, but the fact that he even got traded should be case in point that the Mavs realized quickly that they messed up. And then I'm also going to include Gabe Vincent, who the Lakers signed to a 3-year, $33 million deal. It's funny because I actually thought that this was one of the better signings of the offseason initially. Yeah, $11 million is a bit much, basically the whole mid-level exception, but given how Vincent showed up for the Heat in the playoffs, I thought this would be a great pickup for the Lakers, who were looking to get back to the conference finals and beyond. But since the signing, the dude has played all but 5 games. Now, you can't control injuries. Obviously, it's not something the Lakers expected, but even in the few games that he did play, he didn't look good. And now you also have to consider, is he going to be able to come back and be the player he used to be after missing a whole season? And great, now we used our whole mid-level exception on this guy. It doesn't help that the Lakers are fighting for their play-in lives as well. It would be a different story if the Lakers were sitting at the top of the conference and it didn't matter that Vincent hadn't been playing. But now, yeah, they could have used that exception on another player with how the season has been going for them thus far. And then these last three, you've got the big ones, the large deals over $100 million, long-term contracts that these teams are now regretting the first year into the deal. And I'm going to start with the Memphis Grizzlies signing Desmond Bane to a whopping 5-year, $205 million extension. The fact that Desmond Bane is a $200 million plus level player should say all you need to know about this contract. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Desmond Bane. I had always talked about how he was one of the most underrated players in the NBA and a steal in the draft for going 30th overall. Can shoot lights out, plays hard, big time hustler, and he has a big impact on winning. I thought he absolutely deserved a big contract. But $205 million for Desmond Bane, nah, that's a bit of a stretch. And I get it. The Grizzlies wanted to keep their core intact, to keep building around Ja Morant, but they also didn't need to re-sign him this past offseason. They could have let him hit restricted free agency. Give him a prove-it year, see how he does, and match any offer sheet that he gets in the following offseason. And yes, Bane has been injured, so it's not really fair to judge his play on what we're seeing now, especially when the Grizzlies season was over from the start of the year. But as good as Bane is and has been, I don't see him playing to the level of that contract. And the contract hasn't even kicked in yet either. It starts next season, as this was the final year of his rookie scale deal. I'm sure for the Grizzlies now, they probably would take it back and wish they had waited until this offseason to give him a deal, one that isn't a max contract. Then, of course, one of the more regrettable contracts, even though I'm sure the Warriors and their fans will try and act like it's not and that he's worth every penny because of what he means to this franchise. And yes, that's Draymond Green giving him a 4-year, $100 million extension. Look, I don't fault the Warriors for extending Draymond Green. He declined his player option and could have left to go to another team, and the Warriors wanted to keep the heart and soul of their franchise to ensure that he stayed. They offered him a deal that he couldn't refuse, when in reality, they were really only bidding against themselves. No team, not a contending team anyway, that would have been interested in Draymond Green had the cap space to offer him something even close to that amount. And the teams that actually had cap space to offer something that high for Draymond Green, they wouldn't have done it because he wouldn't have fit their timeline. And the Warriors should now be regretting it more and more because of all the antics and shenanigans that have come with Draymond Green this past season, getting in fights with everybody, multiple suspensions. And look, maybe all that baggage was okay, and you could be willing to deal with it when he was in his prime and always in the running for Defensive Player of the Year. But now, when his play hasn't been backing up the headache that comes with him, nah. And to make it worse, the Warriors season has not gone well. It's very likely they'll miss the playoffs. They might even miss the play-in at this point. And they now have Draymond Green at the age of 34 under a guaranteed contract for the next 3 seasons after this one, paying him until he's 37 years old, when he's already starting to show signs of decline. And with the Warriors likely realizing they're going to need to pivot in the immediate future and consider another timeline, they're quickly going to realize Draymond isn't going to fit that timeline, especially when his contract extends beyond that of Steph Curry's. Yeah, they're going to realize they made a mistake. But honestly, even as regrettable of a contract the Warriors gave to Draymond Green, none can be worse than what the Blazers handed to Jerami Grant, who they signed to a 5-year, $160 million contract extension. Jerami Grant, great player, but not an all-star, a player whose game has never really led to winning on his respective teams, a player who is 30 years old now. They gave him a 5-year, $160 million contract. Now, to be fair though, this was an act of desperation to keep Damian Lillard because at the time of the signing, Dame had not yet requested out of Portland, and it was believed that they could still make things work by keeping Dame around and making a last push effort for putting together a title team around him. And of course, 2 days after they extended Jerami Grant, Dame was like, yeah, I want out. Like, what are you all doing here? This was your win now move? That was the move to get me to try and stay? Taking up the rest of our cap space with Jerami Grant? So I say to be fair to the Blazers because I highly doubt they would have signed Grant to that deal had they known that Dame was going to request a trade. But because they did it, he's now under contract for the next 4 seasons after this. And at that amount, that is going to be very hard to move in a trade. And the fact that Grant doesn't fit their direction, their timeline of a rebuild and a youth movement, this is without a doubt a contract the Blazers are now regretting. Anyway, those are the contracts that were signed this offseason that teams are already regretting, in my opinion. There are others that are getting there, but more time is probably needed to really make that determination as the contract fills out. I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know if you think there are contracts that deserve to be on this list that I missed. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.